John Dowling. Welcome here, sir.
Hi, Michael. How are you doing? Thanks, John Michael, for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. You know, there's a lot I'd like to cover. I have a few questions I'd like to have you weigh in on, but by all means, during our segment, please raise any issues that I may not have raised that you think are timely and important for the American people to know. And I know you're very, very plugged in to the real world we're living in. You're certainly aware of the matrix we've been controlled in, and it's important to understand that. But equally important to understand what's happening in the parallel economies and world that's being created as we're entering into the dawning of the golden age later next year, in my opinion. I'd like to begin with this, myself included. A lot of folks would like some clarity, if you're able to respond to the Genius Act. There's been, confusions. There's been things that MAGA likes, things that MAGA doesn't like. Marjorie Taylor Greene certainly didn't care for certain aspects of that, but she's a different conversation for a different day. Genius Act. Can you talk with us about that a bit, John?
Sure, John. I mean, there's a lot to it, obviously, but the nuts and bolts of it is it's basically a U.S. stablecoin act. The premise behind it is that it's supposed to provide a regulatory framework for all stablecoins to be backed one-to-one against cash and treasury reserves with a better sense of transparency and clarity. That's the premise behind it. I'm not personally sold on all of that because I think there's only, and again, I'm not a financial advisor. As you said earlier, it's not financial advice, just really good. From our diligent research, we have a very robust team that I'm honored to stand beside that helps in these capacities. And as we studied it and prayed about it, we believe ultimately at the end of the day, there's about 7 to 10 legitimate cryptos in that space that will pass the smell test, but a lot will be left by the wayside.
What would be some of those, if you're prepared to respond? What would be some of the top three, let's say, that would be favored? The 7 to 10 that you've just laid out. There are a lot of confusions of XRP, XLM, Bitcoin, Ethereum, this thing, that thing. What would be the top three from your analysis?
Well, I can only tell you what I hold. I can't speak for everybody else because, like you said, there's a myriad of different, ethos on the subject matter. But I'm a big proponent of gold and silver as God's money. I know you are. I know your staff is. So using that as a governance, XRP, XLM, Stellar Lumens, XDC, gold, silver, copper. It's going to be pegged to those. So when we go back to an asset-backed treasury, specifically backed monetary system backed by gold and silver, it will be pegged to that, which will give it stability, growth, and it is part of the new blockchain and the new economic ecosystem and where we're headed.
Thank you. Bitcoin. Let's talk about Bitcoin. Eric Trump and the Trump Foundation, I guess it may be, is very involved, very vocal, and on the subject of Bitcoin. Talk with us about Bitcoin. Some people say it's going to go to zero. Some people say it was a black hat operation. Some people say get into Bitcoin. What say you?
So I don't own any personally right now, just because of its history and its price point. Start with that. I believe, are going to see, John Michael, 2 bull runs coming up. One somewhere, because President Trump is going to announce pretty soon here, somewhere either by the end of November, early December, a big push for the stock market, QE, quantitative easing, and that's going to find its way into the stock market and cryptos. So there'll be a short-term bull run, we believe, somewhere between give or take December, January. Then the market will crash. We believe in the first quarter. We've had guests. A good friend of mine who's been at Schwab for 28 years does all of these analytical studies and all the charts and the matrices are showing ostensibly a first quarter crash. So then there'll be another wave of a second bull run with the cryptos March to, we'll say, June. So with respect to Bitcoin, I do think it will go down dramatically. I could see it topping out at about 175,000 and going down to maybe 20,000 even. I could see it going lower. Now, whether the Trump administration will reuse that and peg it to gold and make it something good remains to be seen. But I wouldn't be a buyer right now at this point.
Okay, and so that can contrast with XRP and XLM, does it not? Because of the gold aspect, correct?
It does. Yes, correct.
Okay. Excellent. Well, from a 40,000-foot view, because I'm an expert in nothing and a student in everything, but a pretty good student, and so I'm always learning, and perhaps I'll learn something here. Um, the From a 40,000-foot view, pardon me, would you say that well, look, we know the dollar's under attack. We know about the expanding BRICS nations. We know about all that, and the dollar's value down, I don't know, by some estimates, 10-12% year to date. How low do you think the dollar will go? How successful, it's a currency supremacy war. How successful will the elitists, the enemies, the central bank system, the cabal, et cetera, Federal Reserve, how low do you think the dollar will go? How successful will they be? And are we going to witness the actual death of the dollar, or will the dollar, of course, then be rebounded by counter moves by President Trump?
Well, so if you look at, excuse me, I'm sorry, if you look at the Dixie, the dollar index, it looks like it's really strong, 99 range, but that's an
Yeah,
illusion
it does.
because that's not countering for hyperinflation and inflation. Its real value at right now is like less than a penny. And you know that because when you go to the gas station, grocery store, it costs, people are not making the connection, John, and that's what we're wholly tasked to do is help them shine a light on it. They're not making the connection between the cost of goods and services. They're thinking that President Trump isn't lowering the gas price or any of this stuff. First of all, it goes down to the states. It's not federal on his side, it's states. A lot of the blue states
Okay.
are constricting the downward price control. But you're going to see the death of the Federal Reserve note and the birth of the U.S. note, Treasury backed by gold and silver. But right now, the dollar has no value. And again, you know that because it's costing more at the gas station, the grocery store, hardware store, wherever you go. It's taking more of those pieces of paper because they're just printing into infinity. And what you're seeing is the bubble on the stock market reaching its zenith before it pops.
Yes, I agree with that. And the fact that you alluded to, says the dollar's not going to crash and go away over Trump's dead body, to use that expression. But it will continue to be plummeted due to the digital inflation that the Federal Reserve has created. And then it will be restored, backed by gold, would you say? Backed by gold, perhaps other commodities? To walk us through the transition from the suffering dollar today to the QFS. Touch on some of those points along the way so people at least can grasp uh, the trajectory we're on, so that we don't get mired down into the muck of everything that's here and the worst that's yet to come. They can hang on to where we're heading. Can you bullet point some of the transitionary steps, please?
Okay, I'll try to do it as succinctly as I can because, as you know, there's a lot of nuance to it. What he's doing is building a parallel economy. He's taking the old system, he's phasing it out. You know, if you notice with the shutdown, he started funding some of the government programs like SNAP, but now he's doing it with tariffs. He's not doing it with Federal Reserve uh, taxpayer dollars. So there's a lot of confusion about tariffs. People think that that's a cost to the people. It's not. It's external collecting from a lot of other countries. He's compiling, John, from the gold card. He's compiling from Nassar Jassar. He's compiling from the OFAC list, which is the Office of Foreign Assets Control. That's basically the Treasury cops. There's a list I can show you offline, 3,000 pages of all the seizures and arrests of assets worldwide that he's been collecting in alphabetical order, I might add, from every country for many, many years, including the tariffs. So you have all these tranches of money. So he's basically repulling this new system and he's transitioning the old system out. He's going to try to do it as seamlessly as possible, but there will be some bumps along the way because when you change the entire global economy, it's just impossible to make it completely smooth. But he'll do as much as he can. Try to use what's called quantitative easing to blow the bubble up, basically expand the debt and kill the old Federal Reserve System. As Sun Tzu Water War said, never fear with an enemy that's in the process of destroying themselves. So he's letting the old system kill itself off and starve itself off while he brings in the new one. As he makes the case with the new Fed chair that he's going to announce, excuse me, before Christmas, Scott Bessent said earlier today, we're hopeful that's going to be Judy Shelton because she's an avid gold and silver bug. And she's really been the only one that's been vocally advocating for precious metals to be the new standard for, or the old standard pre 1971, when Nixon and Kissinger took us off the gold standard and really did a huge disservice to the economy as a whole. So he's bringing us in parlance, he's bringing us back to the future, and righting a lot of the wrongs, but then also using elements of digital technology with the blockchain for greater transparency to get these transactions in quicker time. Because a lot of the banks are basically playing games with people's money, holding up wire transfers, holding up people's payments to get interest, which is all fraudulent and completely unconstitutional. So he's unwinding the bank's power. This Saturday, John, is an incredibly important seminal moment in our economic history because ISO 20022 goes into effect. And that basically works along Basel III, which is a Swiss form of compliance that all banks have to adhere to, whether they're a credit union or a major tier one bank like a Wells Fargo, Chase, B of A. They all have to adhere to that. Now you couple that with ISO, now that transparency, they can't get away with these backdoor deals, money laundering, wire transfer,
Yes.
manipulation, all that stuff goes out the window. So that's how, in a nutshell, he's going to kind of try to do as much of a seamless transition from the old to the new as possible.
Wow, that was a wonderful segment. You unpacked a lot of very interesting things I like to follow up on. Thank you for that. Let me begin with, I love the phrase you use, bringing us back to the future. That's well said, and it's exactly right. And I hope Judy Shelton gets in there. And to your point on Richard Nixon, I've seen the graphs. I'm sure you have. We're talking about an inflation graph, just nice until 1971, was it? And then from there on, whoop, off the roof, through the charts, and that is an unfortunate. And of course, at the same time, Nixon took us off the gold standard. They decided to open up trade and become friends with China, which I question how productive that turned out. But, define ISO and define that for us, and then come back into context of how you placed it in your dialogue just now, please.
So, so ISO is basically an international standard of operability, and it allows the blockchain is basically the digital central nervous system by which all transactions will run. So XRP, for example, or Ripple to be precise, is going to be the gold standard, no pun intended, and somewhat literal, to making these transactions happen in fractions of a second. So basically, everyone will be on the blockchain. They'll have their own individual ID. Think of it like not a social security number, but like a social security number, where it's a unique identifier that's going to allow everybody to have their own account through the QFS you were talking about and be able to access those monies. Plus, if they're in cryptos like the ones I mentioned, or they're in a lot of the foreign currencies like the dinar, the dong, and Thai baht, and many, many others, they'll be able to exchange that and work through the blockchain to do that. So it's going to basically eliminate money laundering, a lot of the mafia transactions, all that kind of stuff is going to be, everything's out in the open now. It's very transparent. So just basically a lot of the nefarious activity will no longer be allowed to go on because it's basically accessible.
Yeah, that's a great point that I'm familiar with because I've thought with it, and other guests have raised this, but it's not often discussed. And I'll turn it into my own words. That system, by and large, will prevent, to a great degree, all the criminalities' control over their money. You take their money away, you take their activity away, you take their activity away, you have a better world. Very simple, but this is real big and real powerful and very true. That contributes to the notion of a golden age. How about a world without war? How about a world with greatly reduced criminality? How about raising the moral fiber of individuals, to be children of God the way intended, versus looking for every loophole and every angle to make ends meet. Never mind all the criminality. You're talking about gun running, you talk about drug running, you talk about child running, all this stuff. You squeeze that money, good luck. And so that's an interesting aspect of this. It brings me to, while we've been discussing, the transition of the parallel systems, dismantling the Fed, the IRS, creating the channels with which for money to travel on in the new systems and so forth. The old system's not coming aboard anytime soon yet, as I see it. So spend a few moments contrasting that with, while we're building this, and soon will be just there it is, okay, at some point. Um, what's happening on the other side with the central banks and the trillions in deposit in all the central bank system throughout the world, and all of those that have accounts there? What are they going to be doing? What currency will they be working with? And what's going to happen to the end user?
Okay, again, that's a very broad, protracted question, so I have to treat it like an elephant and do a piece at a time. So
Absolutely.
if you look at certain countries like Saudi Arabia and Iraq, for instance, you just saw President Trump meet with bin Salman. The significance on many levels, at no pun intended, had ripple effects for what's about to take place. They historically, with Iraq, were one of the few countries that would not go along with a central bank system, which is why our deep state U.S. government went in and enslaved them, knocked their currency down. All wars, as you kind of alluded to, are banker wars. Excuse me. And you do have to have peace to have prosperity. During President Trump's first term, you'll note, I liken him a lot to King Cyrus, right? He was not a true Christian in the sense that we know it, but as the late great Kim Clement, a prophet that I put a lot of stock and trade into, and our team does as well,
Yes, me
said that
too.
he would use a non-praying man to turn him into a praying man, into the highest seat in the land. So in his first term, what did he do? He restored Israel, Jerusalem, the capital. He did the sword dance. He started making capitulations and changes around the world and started putting people on notice in the Vatican and Parliament, all things you already know. And now in his second term, because Kim Clement said he was going to get 2 terms. He didn't say they'd be consecutive. He just said he'd get 2 terms. So nuance of language. Now what he's doing is he's cementing the foundation of what he did in his first term by nationalizing essentially all of these countries like Iraq and Vietnam to have assets in the ground on a level playing field, 1 to 1. So they will stand on their own 2 feet. Ironically, you have a lot of these countries who are stockpiling gold hand over fist because they can control in the banks the amount of gold, because the world, as you probably know, is replete and awash with gold. What the world does not have enough of is silver, for its obvious conductor and capabilities in manufacturing, robotics, AI, etc. So there's a short on that. And that's what you're having with a lot of the speculators trying to short the markets. There's a process called, I'm sure your colleague knows it, backwardization, where they're basically calling in premiums to get the paper out because they know what the writing on the wall is. You see Warren Buffett already left for the cheap seats on the back door because he knows. And when you watch the whales do what they're doing, this is germane to your question, that's sort of a
Yes.
foretelling of the writing on the wall of the crash. So at the end of the day, anybody who's operating in the old system, central banks,
Mhm.
is going to have a really rude awakening and a really bad day, because it's literally a fleecing of the wealth of the wicked back to the righteous. And to level the playing field, again, you have to have peace, which means no more wars, no more crimes, no more nefarious crap, and you bring that wealth back
Yes.
to the people. And that goes back to what I was talking about with the OFAC list, because when you look at that in its massive layout of seizures and assets, you start to see a picture whereby a lot of these characters are the people you were talking about and depicting that have been able to skate by. I mean, you have countries that, they don't even use their currencies. They're using dollars because they're basically being forced by corruption, Iraq being one of them, or was, the Iranian proxies, forcing them to use US dollars because that's the gig. But that is now coming to an end. So the central
Yes.
banks are going to have to find a new gig here, and fast.
Thank you. Good information. It seems to me that the central bank's plan would be a central bank digital currency, the CBDC, which of course President Trump speaks vehemently against. I've seen a segment of legalese in a document for Bank of America, for example, and it would stand to reason, as I understand all central banks, that they can convert the depositors' money from a U.S. current U.S. dollar into a central bank digital currency overnight by the flick of a switch. And then it's been often said by many of the folks we've interviewed, and it's been stated by them themselves that they're going to bring in something similar to the Chinese credit scoring system. So would you concur with that narrative, a central bank digital currency versus our new soon-to-be treasury-backed dollar en route to a QFS situation? Meanwhile, on the other side, these central banks are sitting there, and the pot, it's trillions of dollars that we collectively have in these banks. Do you have any comments or warnings for those that remain fully in that system during this transition? Because I consider right now, John, this is the danger zone of the transition. This is where people can really get hurt. There's a mechanism that they can get hurt by. If they're holding bonds because they think bonds are safe, because typically they are, they're going to get hurt. We're going to talk about other markets in a moment. What's your commentary on the central bank digital currency and the trap that people may be in?
Well, so first of all, I'm completely against anything in paper, stock market, CBDCs, especially. Europe is going to be particularly susceptible to that, and a lot of other foreign nations, because they don't have the constitution. And this is not by any means proselytization of my faith, although I'm unapologetically Christian. I don't shy away from it. But the U.S. is a different animal, and we wholly are constituted as a Judeo-Christian society, whereas other nations are not. So the people here have to stand up and fight against it. And part of what we're doing is this collective awareness to combat that. My point being is that I think a lot of foreign nations outside the U.S. are particularly susceptible, like Europe, like Australia, for instance, because they don't have what we have in the many blessings, and to include President Trump. But just because he's vehemently against it does not mean that the bad guys are not going to try to push and sneak it in the back door. Right. What they're not counting on is that our Lord Jesus, Yeshua, has a different plan to thwart the enemies, as Kim Clement said. But I think the number one antidote is for the people to stand up, be aware, be educated, do the research, and combat against it. Be into things that you physically touch and own, like precious metals, foreign currencies. You can do a crypto hardware wallet where you physically are on a decentralized network. Okay, so the CBDCs are a centralized network that the banks control. Decentralized, like XRP. Another one would be Shiba Inu on the Shibaverse, for instance. That's going to come out and combat Ethereum. It'll be the new Shibaverse will go against the Ethereum, because Ethereum is expensive. There's a lot of gas fees. You typically have to buy other coins through it, for example. So it's a lot more steps, whereas Shiba is going at some point, not today, but at some point it's going to have its own network that's independent and decentralized. So the key is to be in decentralized assets, physical assets you can touch and hold that are in your possession, because I am of the ethos, if you don't touch it, you don't hold it. Definitely don't be in the CBDCs. And I echo your guest about treasury bonds, particularly the 10 and 30-year yield bonds. China, Japan is dumping it hand over fist. I don't know if you're aware of this, but I had a guest on, you're probably familiar with, Lynette Zhang, and she was letting me know a few months back that in Japan this summer, the commercial real estate market was down 90%. Residential is 95%. My guest that I have from Schwab, that's a friend of mine I've known many, many years. You can see that on my podcast later on if you want. He goes into great detail breaking down the statistical analytical chart flow that he's been doing for the last several years. And on the 2 years he's been on my show, he's been spot on, even when I didn't want him to be, because it meant that this thing would be protracted a little bit. But ultimately, God is in the long game, and so must we be. And he's showing me that in the next, conservatively, 2 to 3 months from now, we're going to see this crash you were alluding to, which will affect the stock market, which will affect the cryptos. I mentioned that earlier, and it will certainly affect the residential real estate market. But the good news is when we go back to an asset-backed U.S. Treasury note, not a Federal Reserve note, that will give people real purchasing power, again, powered by precious metals, and ostensibly the cost of things will go down. I know it's hard for people to see right now, but they will go down dramatically, because what President Trump's going to do starting in December is start lowering the energy costs. Energy is the lifeblood of everything. You know that. So lower diesel costs means lower gas costs, means lower food costs, means lower electricity, and so on and so forth. Because we now have all these quantum technologies that are going to be have been suppressed from us for 50, 75, 100 years, who knows how long. And that's going to be the lifeblood. And that is accessible in assets in the ground in these different countries. I apologize for the verbosity, but it's only to explain your protracted question of how this all plays together and where we're headed.
Thank you very much. I'm rapid firing at you here, but this is a good one or two more questions, and anything else you'd like to weigh in on before we wrap the segment up. I want to ask you about the 38, 39 trillion, pick your number, of the federal debt. From my understanding, research, guests I've interviewed, documents I've read, um, that the lion's share of that debt is not going to be ours. It's going to be moved off to those that fraudulently created it, namely the Federal Reserve. And maybe it ties into the fact that the U.S. corporation of 1871 is now defunct. Thank you, President Trump. And with that, as that goes, so does that debt. It ties into that package as I see it. Quick response to that before I talk about the Saint Germain Trust and the confiscated gold from the tunnels and of the Vatican. What's your take on that 38 trillion?
So I'm glad you asked this question, John Michael, because again, a lot to talk about here. I'll try to be as succinct as I can. Again, a lot to unpack. So we showed on my podcast years ago actual documentation that back in 2020 during COVID, President Trump actually baked the Fed into the Treasury. So it already happened in his first term. He used that downtime to rejigger things and reposition it in our favor, right? So I use the old Genesis 50:20, what the enemy meant for harm, God will use for good for the saving of all souls. Perfect depiction of what he did in a nutshell. I've had many great guests on my podcast like you have. I know we share a lot of the same guests over the years, Bill Holter being one of them. And Bill was quick to point out that the rate of unemployment is manipulated, so too is the rate of the quote unquote debt. And what constitutes debt? It's unconstitutional. We are going back to a constitutional republic, as you rightly alluded to. I think we're going to be headed there. The Victory Day is July 4th of next year, our 250th anniversary for the country. That's when it publicly gets unveiled. But a lot of these steps financially have to transact, as you know, to get us there. He needs at least 2/4 of GDP solidly to get up to that point, particularly when you're talking about the midterms that are less than a year away. So as far as the debt's concerned, Bill, John Rich wrote a book on what the real rate of inflation, the real debt, the real unemployment. The real rate of unemployment in America, he estimates, is about 20%, not what they were saying. And then the real quote unquote debt would be 317, maybe 330 trillion. But only 10, X22 estimates through his contacts that about 10 billion of that is actually responsible for consumer debt. And as you rightly pointed out, the rest of it falls on the auspices of the nefarious deep state Fed. So they're going to, when he revalues gold, which he's going to do, I think X22 is right. I think he's going to, we believe gold will probably go to about 5,000 before the end of this year, then 6, and then he's going to audit the Fed and Fort Knox, all the stuff that we've been waiting on. A lot of times he'll make an announcement, and then several months later we'll see things transact, this being one of them. And he'll make a case for why we don't need the Fed. We can use tariffs, which again is constitutional. The ERS, external revenue, instead of the internal, charging people fraudulent penalties and taxes, payroll tax, excise tax, which nobody's really defined what that is, capital gains, income, property tax, all that stuff gets rescinded with a flip of a switch when he revalues gold, which we believe will be about 20 to 25,000. But what we're excited about is silver, which has been massively suppressed. Everybody knows. We believe at some point, instead of being 6-1, we'll go 1-1 with gold, and it'll really level things up quick. And that's the quickest way to kill the debt, is just power it back with assets, something real, because they've just been printing, funny money, basically Federal Reserve notes, QE, again, quantitative easing, just run the printing machine, and he's letting them basically take themselves out, like Sun Tzu said. So very encouraging for where we're headed in the very near future.
Yes, and the reason I might add, first off, that's very well said. Thank you. People might be thinking, well, why didn't the Fed implode upon itself over these years? Well, there wasn't a competing parallel system. Now there is, and now they're in trouble. And gold will expose the Fed, and that's what's happening right now, and all their manipulation. I want to just ask you the repatriation of wealth. There's a lot of chatter about that over these years, particularly in the new media space. Some of it off the charts wrong, and some of it probably pretty spot on, some of it in the vicinity of accuracy. From what I've picked up is, well, first off, there's the Saint Germain Trust, which I understand has 160 trillion. No one's talking about the Lee Wanta money. I'm wondering what happened with that. And then you have the plane loads. I don't know, 400, 500, 600 plane loads of pallets of gold that have been stolen from the world, as well as other valuable things and information from the Vatican and other places that is now secure. You mentioned auditing Fort Knox, which I think has to happen at some point, which is why they floated it out there a while back. And so when you look at all of that, and you look at the fact that I know this sounds crazy to the audience, but much of the contracts that we've been engaged in America, whether it's mortgage notes, whether it's some of the debts with the banks, the credit cards, and so forth, may not hold if they were fraudulent. I'm not saying that people are just going to get all their debt wiped away, but I think some of that could happen. Setting this up for a question. So then you have President Trump with the Sovereign Wealth Fund speaking about taking the surpluses that are coming in, paying down the debt. Of course, there's other mechanisms you just alluded to, but also returning the dividends of that sovereign wealth fund back to we the people. So he's floated the $2,000 check coming around July. Okay, I view that as a tip of the iceberg. I've talked with a lot of very interesting people that are pretty much in the know, and some of the things that have been brought to our attention is that there's going to be a whole lot more coming to us than a $2,000 dividend check in July. But not to say that you can go cash your Zimbabwe and your Iraqi dinar tomorrow and become a trillionaire. That's not going to happen the way a lot of people say, in my opinion. And it wouldn't work if it did, flooding the world with trillions of dollars with people that never had more than a nickel to spend. That wouldn't work. So I understand there's a plan where they've calculated for the value of our birth certificate and our life energy and so forth, of a value assigned to us by age bracket, where we're going to start to see, in my opinion, from July forward for the rest of our days, money coming back to us based on certain formulas. Comment on that, any facts and or speculation and opinions you have about that, and then anything else you'd like to conclude with. We're going to have to wrap up our segment. So take it away, John.
Okay. Well, thank you. Good questions. Well, I'm going to answer your question, start with a question. Have you ever owned a business?
Oh, yeah, since I'm 29 years old.
Okay. So, when businesses go out of business and default, they don't go try to collect back from vendors or for customers, right? They write it off. A lot of these banks that are going to be going away are going to have to write off that debt automatically as a reactionary response to going out of business. So any mortgages, which by Black's Law Dictionary, the fourth edition, constitutes it as a debtor's prison, a mortgage. That's what it means. So again, unconstitutional. Any credit cards, mortgages, student loans, medical bills, all that kind of stuff is just going to get, and car loans, all that stuff's going to get frittered away because banks produce no products or services. They literally live out what we learned in school, no taxation without representation. Then they have the audacity to charge us interest on top of the money they're already floating. So they take your money, inject it with steroids, loan it out to other people, and just create this endless cycle of debt. Inflation is a hidden tax. We need to remember that. As for the St. Germain's Trust, yes, that's one of many tranches. Yes, there were 650 plus plane loads that came out of the Vatican. Let's not forget, you touched on, I'm glad you brought up, excuse me, most of people's birth certificates in the world were held in the Vatican. We don't really hold our real birth certificates. Those were hidden away from us. It'll be interesting to see if we can get those back, because if you actually do your research and follow the rabbit hole down, your birth certificate is worth billions. You can, if you had a
Yeah.
401k or an IRA, even if you close it, it's still in perpetuity collecting interest. You can go on Fidelity or Schwab, and you can use Treasury Direct as an example, and you can calculate all those bonds and see what the compounded interest over many, many years comes to. I say this to say that there are tranches upon tranches of money. St. Germain's is just one of many different
Mhm.
funds that will be kicked out to the people. There will be people who do make a high amount of money. That doesn't mean everybody will, yes, but there will be some people, depending on how you're positioned, what kind of favor God has put on your life. It's a situational thing. But for the lion's
Mhm.
share, uh, we believe that one of the plans is a tiered structure based on age. So if you've worked into the system 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, etc., Nasara will help as a form of it, or the sovereign wealth fund, or the golden age, however you want to characterize it. That
Correct.
monies will start
Yes.
coming back in accelerated fashion to the people. You're right. They don't want to just, it's like when you drive a car, and we grew up in the East Coast, right? In the wintertime, if you flood it with too much gas, the engine seizes up. So you got to do it steadily and gradually. And I use that analogy for this. You can see where I'm going with it. They're going to start, small and build. I don't personally believe we're waiting until July for the 2000. That's a dividend. That's not a stimulus check. That's money's like a stock
Yeah.
market dividend. When you make money on the market, that's a profit from the tariffs.
Mhm.
So that's an important
Yep.
delineation. I think he's throwing the deep state off. I think that's coming much sooner, probably more like January, because he knows the dire situation. And not, you got to remember, John Michael, that I'm sure your metals expert would concur, about less than 1% of the population owns precious metals. Similarly, I would
Mhm.
think probably a percent or less owns foreign currencies. So to the bad guys and even to the good guys, we're considered collateral damage because we're so minuscule in comparison to the whole of the population. When we go into the exchange at the banks, that's a key one too, by the way. No 800 numbers, just make an appointment with a wealth manager. It was easy to buy, it's easy to sell. They will be collateral damage. They won't even really notice this because the whole of the population has no idea that this is going to happen. And by the time they do, if they ever do, it's after the fact. So yes, I do see, excuse me, Saint Germain's in a whole bunch of tranches coming back to the people in a variety of ways. The gold card, the $5 million gold card, is going to be spread out. There's just so many things that we are not privy to
Mhm.
yet. Beyond what we do
Yes.
know, we're in an unprecedented place because, as you're probably
Mhm.
aware, with the Kuwaiti dinar revaluing in 91, 92, I knew somebody whose family was involved in that. Germany, when they lost World War II, they were able to re up their currency by doing this. This has happened before, it's just never happened on this grand scale. Um,
Mhm.
the thing that I think need to focus on less than all the voluminous amounts of money is, are we prepared? Have we changed our mindset from lack to abundance, from
Yes.
fear to faith, from selfishness to
Mhm.
selflessness? It's not a lecture, it's just an honest admission. I think the work
Mhm.
is changing our mindset, taking action, and sowing where you prosper. Right? What did Kim Clement say? Feed the lonely, the poor, the sick, the hungry, the needy, the widows, the orphans. This is my desire, says the Lord. We need to be motivated inwardly to act as a conduit the way the Lord would and think like he would think and help where he commands us to help. He's not against abundance. He just wants to know
No.
that it doesn't rule us, that it's not an idol to us, like a marriage or a job or anything else for that matter. It's money is a freedom and a vehicle to make things happen for the Lord. And I think that's, at the end of the day where this all kind of lies.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to end our segment. I know there's other information you wanted to share with us, but time is short. You've been the first guest here on the program. I find a lot of value in what you've presented, your analysis, your opinions, your facts, your speculations, well founded, well grounded, and well delivered. I hope to have you back in the future where we'll just dive into one or two subjects in greater detail to extrapolate from you your views as we go through this Global Financial Reset. I want to thank you, John Dowling. What's the best place for people to follow you and your work beyond your appearances on this show?
Well, thanks again for having me, John Michael. I do look forward to being back with your permission, and it was great to connect with you. I can see why your guests and your audience respectively trust you so much. People can find me on a number of ways on YouTube. It's Chris CHRS Real World and my name, on Rumble under my name, BitChute under my name, and also Telegram under my name as well. And we don't offer the QFS. We don't have anybody sign up for that kind of stuff. We don't take donations or any of that stuff. If you see X or Facebook or Instagram, that is not us. Those are bots trying to impersonate us. We're not on any of those platforms. There's only 4 places where we can be found.
Great. Well, thank you very much. You're doing excellent work. You don't need to hear that from me. But I've acknowledged it just the same. Thank you, John, for being here. Appreciate it very much. We'll connect you up with our producer and have you back. Thank you very much.